A group of delvers is tasked with learning the truth behind an alleged suicide of an elderly explorer in Ship City. Little do they realize this seemingly mundane task will set the player characters in motion to possibly solving one of the greatest mysteries of mankind in the Lost Horizon. That's the premise of Coriolis, the Great Dark, the Flowers of Algorab, and I'll be sharing my review right after this. Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I'll be sharing my review of Coriolis, the Great Dark, the Flowers of Algorab from Free League Publishing. This box set with PDFs carries an MSRP of $49.99. I do apologize. With my first look video, I mentioned it had an MSRP of $39.99. In all honesty, that is what a lot of online retailers are charging for the box set. Now, if you want to grab just the PDF alone, you can do so over at DriveThruRPG for $24.99. Having said all that, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got the Flowers of Algorab for Coriolis, the Great Dark. Few things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Free League Publishing were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. It's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the booklets. We're not going to look at every card, every handout, but I do want to give you a really good feel for what you're going to find inside this campaign set. And then lastly, this is an adventure campaign. So if you're a player and your game master has picked up the Flowers of Algorab, maybe they just haven't started running it yet, maybe they said they're going to buy this, keep in mind there are spoilers ahead. So I am warning you right up front. Now, of course, if your game master is thinking about picking this up, let them know about this review. So that way they can approach the Flowers of Algorab and make a far more informed buying decision. All right, let's take a peek at what's inside. Now, I did share a first look video, so if you want a little closer look at some of these things, I would definitely recommend give that a peek. But we've got 12 dice. They are six-sided dice. They are very nicely cut. And we have 9 tan dice and 3 black gear dice. Coriolis the Great Dark does utilize the Year Zero engine, so it is a dice pool mechanic. It is not really very mechanically heavy by any stretch of the imagination. Now, there are some delve mechanics that do come into play with Coriolis the Great Dark. We're going to take a look at some of the delves in this campaign also. Now, I've had some people ask, is it sort of like a mini game? And I tell them, no, the delves aren't a mini game. They're just different mechanics. So if you think of, say, old school role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, right? Earlier editions of Dungeons and Dragons. So AD&D, second edition D&D. So your dungeon delving mechanically is a little bit different than your wilderness exploring. It's kind of like that. That's how I would really sum things up. So really nice dice. We do have 3 small decks of cards. We've got some discoveries that the player characters are going to encounter along the way. So these cards are given to the players just so they have them handy, kind of get a little better idea of what they've encountered, what they've found. We do have gear cards. And as someone pointed out in my first look video, the flamethrower has a misprint. It is the flame thrower. Hey, somebody bring that flamethrower on over here. We got some blight to burn. Yep, unfortunately, it is not known as a flamethrower in the game, but it's whatever. It's not that big a deal. Then, of course, we'll have all the stats for the gear. So we've got some weapons. We've also got various different delve suits. So we've got those cards. As far as the paper stock, very nice. Really well done. I would still throw some penny sleeves on these just to keep them nice and pristine, as I would with the initiative deck, because Coriolis the Great Dark does use an initiative deck for combat. So the players and NPCs will each get a card as far as the initiative order. So these should be sleeved also. So some of these things you're going to be using in more than just the Flowers of Algorab campaign. The cards, the dice, tokens. We do have a bunch of different handouts. So we've got maps. And with Free League Publishing, a lot of times when we get these different maps or battle maps, whatever, they are treated. So these are not just paper, and the paper stock on these is excellent. You also get a map of Ship City, because the first chapter of our tale will take place in Ship City. There will be periods throughout the campaign that the player characters will be returning to Ship City as well. Very nice there. We have a couple of deck plans of different ships, which will be available to the player characters during the campaign. You've got some handouts for the delves. We also have some other handouts. Now, I thought this was kind of weird that we get this handout. This actually has 4 handouts on this side. And then we also have a scan of another delve. This is actually the great big finale. Strangely enough, the player character is not going to receive all of these at one time. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to photocopy this or take a picture on your phone or scan it, whatever, because your player characters are going to find these, but not all at one time. And you're not going to cut this sheet up to give them the handouts because you'll ruin this on the back. That was kind of an odd decision to place the handouts like this, as opposed to just give us little sheets of paper that had these on it. That's really the only critique I have of the handouts. For the most part, the rest are really cool. They're really nicely done. We get the Rhino, which is their all-terrain rover that the Delvers will use. We get the deck plans for that also. Really, really well done. So as far as our extra goodies in this box set, phenomenal, really, outside of those little handouts there. We have 2 booklets. One is the Expedition booklet, which is going to give us a gazetteer of the systems that the player characters are going to explore. And then we'll also have the information about the 2 different ships that are going to be available to the players through the campaign. I will get into those ships in more detail as we take a look at the adventure, just to give you a look. Now, one thing I will point out, I am not a fan of light on dark. Thankfully, it's just the opening of each chapter. Then we get into more easy on the eyes fonts and such. So I do appreciate that. The some of the maps in that will also have the light on dark, which is okay. That doesn't bother me so much. But when you have a book that the entire text run is all light text on black background or dark background, colored background, drives me nuts, because it really makes my eyes tired after just a little bit. I prefer to be able to sit and read an adventure book or rule book at my leisure as much as I want to, as opposed to being like, oh my gosh, this thing's killing my eyes. I got to put this away. So there is that. So just kind of give you an idea, here are the ships. Once again, we're going to see those deck plans. We get some notable crew members. We get crew manifests, what equipment is on board, and so forth. So very cool. So we've got that. And I like the fact that we have this separate. So when there are different encounters taking place, when there are different set pieces that the players are going to experience that involve the ships and the crews, the game master is not going to have to keep flipping back and forth in the campaign book in order to find that information. They can just have this booklet open to the crew manifest or the NPC pages. So well done. Okay, so let's get into the campaign book. A lot of role-playing game campaigns will claim to be epic. This most certainly is. And there are going to be some spoilers. I'm going to try to stay away from huge, massive spoilers, but I really can't share my thoughts about the adventure without talking about some spoilers. But before I do that, let's take a look at the credits page here. A lot of folks worked very hard to bring this to life. Let's give credit where credit is due. So as I mentioned in the open, the player characters are delvers. They work for the Explorers Guild. There are a lot of different guilds in Coriolis the Great Dark. If you are not overly familiar with that role-playing game, I will recommend you check out my review of the core rulebook, because I go into a bit more depth about some of the concepts of Coriolis the Great Dark. This does have a bit of a Middle Eastern flair, a little more of a Victorian era flair as well. Kind of one of the tenets of Coriolis the Great Dark is space is sort of an analog for the ocean during the 18th and 19th century here on Earth. So exploring the great unknown, very dangerous, very mysterious. Definitely like that a ton. So the premise here are the delvers are asked by essentially their boss to investigate this alleged suicide of an elderly explorer, because their boss doesn't think it's really a suicide. So that's going to put the player characters in motion to explore various parts of Ship City. And this is a great opportunity for the game master to introduce Coriolis the Great Dark to the players. So the player characters are going to end up in a variety of different locations throughout Ship City. And there's a lot of great information here about how the game master can pretty much set the scene for these locations as well. So what eventually is going to take place is the player characters are going to find clues to the ancient Ark ship Nadir, which disappeared 500 years ago. So Ship City is essentially built from the remains of another Ark ship. So the two Ark ships set off together, and during the trip, one of the Ark ships disappeared. And then, funny enough, the other Ark ship arrives at its destination only to find that it's already being colonized, because during its trip, humanity found these slipstreams which allow you to travel vast distances in space practically instantaneously. I'll tell you right now, the whole backstory for Coriolis, the original Coriolis, as well as this new edition, The Great Dark, is fascinating. It is super unique. It is a massive selling point for this role-playing game, because there are no other role-playing games out there that have this same sort of vibe to the proceedings. We'll also mention it's probably not for everyone. For one, with Coriolis, it is not a role-playing game that is going to be jam-packed with pulse-pounding combat every single moment. Combat is relatively rare. It should be very deadly because, you know, it would be in real life. So it's not really going to be for the crowd that likes to have, 3, 4, 5 combat encounters in a game session. No, it's certainly not for those sorts of gamers. But for players and game masters out there who really like to immerse themselves in a setting, Coriolis the Great Dark really deserves a look. So what's going to happen is the player characters are going to be put on the trail of this lost arc ship, which is a huge deal. In fact, it's such a huge deal that the various different guilds get together and assign a ship, a cruiser, to the player characters to utilize. They've got an entire crew. They've got representatives from the different guilds on board. And it's going to be an expedition to learn more about how to find this lost arc ship. Because what happens, another spoiler, the player characters, as they're trying to figure out what exactly happened with this suicide, which, come on, it's a role-playing game. Do you think it was a suicide? Of course not. It's a murder. So as they're exploring different locations throughout Ship City, it leads them to a lost vault, actually in Ship City. Now, one of the aspects of Coriolis the Great Dark that's a big deal are artifacts. Heirlooms are called for less powerful artifacts, because there are a race of builders that came before, sort of a lost civilization that you would find in other science fiction games and movies and books and stuff like that, where there's an alien civilization that's long gone. Well, that's the builders. So player characters discover the mummified remains of a scout from the nadir in this lost tomb, which, of course, the tomb has been there far longer than Ship City has been there. How in the world did they get there? And they also have this sphere. It's a synchronicity sphere that they can tell has given out a signal when they touch this sphere. So the powers that be decide, okay, we're going to put together this expedition. We're going to try to find more of these spheres, because if we find enough spheres, we can probably triangulate where the nadir might be at, because they figured that's who's been notified when this sphere has been touched. So that's how the expedition sets off. So the player characters are going to search different systems in search of these spheres. And that's where the different delves will come into place. So there is tons going on in this campaign. Now, this book clocks in at about 192 pages, if memory serves. There is so much jam-packed into those 192 pages. You are going to find a lot of gaming sessions will be occupied by this campaign. This is not an adventure campaign that's going to wrap up in 10 sessions by any stretch of the imagination. There is months of gaming inside this book, which is a fantastic value. Now, in each of these 4 systems, there are going to be 3 delves that the player characters will go on. There are all these other different events going on as well. But the delves themselves, let's get a map of one of the delves. Here we go. So these are what the layouts for the delves look like. All the information about how to utilize these are in the core book for Coriolis the Great Dark. So, and of course, during these delves, each of the player characters has their role that they serve in the crew. So everybody's going to have something to do in the delve. It's not focused just on one particular type of character. No, not at all. So there are 3 of these in each of these systems, and one of them is going to contain a sphere. Now, I will point out the way it's presented here, it's always the third contains the sphere. Because I guess the understanding would be your players are going to realize, okay, so once we hit a sphere, we can get out of this system, move on to the next. But if they do that, they're going to miss out on a ton of cool other stuff that's going on that doesn't necessarily tie into specifically finding the spheres. They might find other information about the nadir and the trip of the nadir and the different scouts and just other cool things about these various different systems. Now, some of these systems are in the midst of being colonized. Some of them are far less hospitable than others. The delves are very unique as well. So there are quite a lot of delves in here. And I got to say, the authors have done a really nice job of making each pretty unique. So they each stand out. It's not just the same exact thing, rinse and repeat for each of the delves. Definitely love that. So the first chapter of the Flowers of Algorab is not sandboxy at all. It's not necessarily linear. The players can approach their investigation in a variety of different ways. There are a lot of locations for them to go check out. Then once we get into the systems, this is very, very sandboxy. So the players can make their own decisions. Keep in mind as well, the player characters are part of a crew on both of the ships, and they're part of a council on each of the ships, which allows them to state their case, but they're not getting to call all of the shots. And I got to also say that having the council with the different guild members is a really nice touch, because if the player characters are going to go off on some wild goose chase, it's a good way for the game master to try to steer the players back on the right course without having to essentially put that portion of the campaign on rails. So I like that quite a bit. Like I said, we've got the delves, but we also have all these other events taking place. I should also point out, this is not going to be an easy campaign for game masters to run. I really do think in the hands of the right game master, the Flowers of Algorab will be a truly memorable campaign. I mean, we're talking about it could go down in the annals of role-playing games as another fantastic, legendary campaign. With the wrong game master, this could just turn into one big slog. And one of the reasons why I mention that is because there is so much going on in this campaign that is going to be completely up to the player characters and the decisions that they make. It's possible they could meet NPCs who join their crew, and these NPCs are probably going to play a super important role in the rest of the campaign. Thing is, that's not included in this book. So that's all going to be up to the game master. It's also very important that the game master reads this in its entirety. Now, to get started, no, you're not going to need to know all about the various different systems and the finale and such. But you will need to know this at some point. So you could get started as a game master just reading through chapter 1, understanding that, maybe even jumping to the finale, just to kind of get a better feel for what eventually happens, and then come back, filling in the various different blanks as you're playing. But this has so many moving parts in it, so many factions, so many different faction relationships, different NPCs from different factions, NPCs who don't belong to factions. There's just a lot to juggle. And like I said, with the right game master, it is going to be phenomenal. With the wrong game master, you're not going to get anywhere near the experience with the Flowers of Algorab. I'm not trying to scare anybody off. I am just pointing that out. But you know what? A lot of famous role-playing game campaigns are like that also. If you're familiar with the massive Nyarlathotep for Call of Cthulhu, another role-playing game campaign which is legendary, but it is also not easy to pull off either. So the finale, yes, the player characters are going to find the nadir. There's something here that takes place that I don't think the players are going to see coming. And I think it is a phenomenal twist. I really do. There are a few twists and turns in this campaign that, if run correctly, your players are going to sit there just mouths agape in shock, maybe even in awe. As I pointed out, this is epic. This is a campaign that is going to change the landscape of Coriolis the Great Dark. This is going to lead to, hopefully, a lot of other adventures with this new edition. And I got to say, I am certainly looking forward to what's next on the horizon from Free League Publishing. All right, that is a peek inside Coriolis the Great Dark, the Flowers of Algorab from Free League Publishing. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. One last item of note. This is not a starter set. I have seen some folks online commenting that this is a starter set. It is not. Maybe they're mistaken simply because we've got dice in this box and there are decks of cards that you would use with other Coriolis the Great Dark adventures. But do not pick this up thinking everything you need is in this box for you to run the Flowers of Algorab, because it's not. Now, that's not a bad thing. That's not a knock on this box set. It's just a fact. I want to make sure that you are aware you do need to have the core rule book in order to utilize this campaign. And what a campaign it is. This is truly epic. A lot of publishers out there will claim that their adventure or adventure campaign is epic. Well, it might be a lot of fun. It might be really cool. Maybe not epic. That is not the case here. This is an epic campaign. This has universe-altering results to it when the player characters finish up this campaign. And I am really excited to see what's in the future for Coriolis the Great Dark. Hopefully we see more support for Coriolis the Great Dark than we saw for the first edition of Coriolis. Because the first edition of Coriolis essentially got a campaign in 3 parts, and that was about it. An adventure here and there, but it was kind of on the back burner a lot for Free League Publishing. And today, Free League Publishing has even more titles out there. So fingers crossed that Coriolis the Great Dark gets the love from its publisher that, in my opinion, it deserves. Now, as the campaign goes, I already mentioned, with the right game master, this is going to be phenomenal. There will be multiple points in this campaign where the players will have their jaws just slack-jawed agape because they can't believe what just took place. Maybe they're shocked. Maybe they're in awe. Maybe it's a sense of wonder. Whatever. There are going to be times, like I said, with the right game master, that your players are going to be just blown away by what's going on, and in a good way. But with the wrong game master, this could turn into just an absolute slog. I'll be very honest. I think I would probably have a little bit of trouble running this to its fullest extent. Mainly because of my age. I don't think I could keep 60 NPCs rattling around my head at the same time while I'm also running the game. Although, okay, the reality is not 60 NPCs, but still, there are a lot of moving parts here. There are a lot of things going on behind the scenes that the player characters and the players won't be aware of, that the game master kind of has to track, such as the relationships the factions have among themselves, because those things will change. Because you got to keep in mind, as this adventure continues and more of the representatives of the guilds get involved. In fact, there's a great ship that the player characters are on for the finale of the campaign, as well as the cruiser they were on. So you've got all of these NPCs, all of these different factions, and they all are looking to do their own things. So it's not just the player characters and their crew, which is making an impact on this campaign, which is really a feature, not necessarily a bug, but it can make running this pretty difficult. So just want to let you know, this is not necessarily going to be a campaign for everyone. As far as the extra goodies, really nicely done. Love the dice. Yes, okay, the card has that misprint. It's the flamethrower. It happens. There are a few typos. I was kind of surprised in the campaign book. Not a ton, but more than I'm used to seeing from Free League Publishing. That they were kind of noticeable. I was like, oh, okay. Not enough to affect my final score, though. So, speaking of final scores, on a scale of 0 to 10, I give Coriolis, The Great Dark, The Flowers of Algorab, a 9 out of 10. Reason why this isn't a 10 out of 10 is because there's probably some complexities to this campaign that will make it much more difficult for some game masters to get the most out of. Close to a 10 out of 10, though. It is really, really cool. I would love to be a player in this, though sadly, now I know everything that happens. So there is that. All right, everybody, that is it for this time out. Of course, if you like the Gaming Gang and would like to support the outlet, you can do so in a few ways. First, by utilizing our affiliate links to the One Bookshelf sites, such as DriveThruRPG. So if you're going to go visit DriveThruRPG, Storyteller's Vault, Dungeon Masters Guild, Wargame Vault, any of the numerous One Bookshelf sites, please stop by thegaminggang.com first. Click on one of our banners. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, you get 5% of that sale as a commission. And those commissions really do add up and help keep the gaminggang.com website around. You can also make a one-time donation by way of PayPal. You can even become a monthly member of our Patreon. You'll find links in the show notes for all of that. Also, in those show notes, you're going to find an invite link to my Discord server. It's absolutely free to sign up, so be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell and be sure to select all notifications, because that way, not only will you be informed when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube as I bring you the latest in tabletop gaming news and more. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, a whole lot more you're not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. And until I see you next time, certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.